If you've ever watched One Piece or Naruto, you know about these guys. But if you're not sure who they are, I'll explain it in simple terms. They're the big dogs of their anime, the cream of the crop, the chosen ones. You get the point. These guys are known as the Admirals, and these guys are known as the Hokages. And I want to know who would win in a hypothetical fight between the two groups. I made a few rules to keep the fight fair because I am talking about two completely different animes here. The first rule is that I will automatically be assuming that strong Haki can counteract Genjutsu techniques. For example, any One Piece character that has Conqueror's Haki would be able to break out of a Genjutsu technique. Rule number 2, Logia type Devil Fruit users can be damaged by the Hokages. These first two rules are known as verse equalization. That basically just means I'm nerfing the overpowered abilities that each verse would have against each other. My last and final rule is I'm only doing a fight between the 3 OG Admiral and the 3 OG Hokage before Tsunade. So if you're wondering why a character like Fujitora or Naruto isn't in this video, that's why. First, I'll be breaking down the two groups' powers and abilities, including weaknesses. I'll be breaking down the One Piece characters first, so the Admirals, and then the Hokages next. First, I'll be talking about Kizaru. His fighting style mostly includes kicks, sword fighting, and the use of his Devil Fruit. His Devil Fruit is of course the Pika Pika no Mi, which basically gives him the ability to turn himself into light. Yes, this means that he can move at the speed of light and send light beams that are of course just as fast as him. I mentioned earlier that Kizaru uses a sword, but what I didn't mention is that he creates that sword out of light. To sum up his fighting style, it's really just speed and power. The next Admiral is Aokiji. Unlike Kizaru, he doesn't really need to rely on his speed or quick attacks because his Devil Fruit is more about power and defense. His Devil Fruit is the Ice Fruit, and you can tell by its name what it basically does. It gives him the ability to turn anything that he touches into ice, and yes, he can turn himself into ice. He has a super important role in the fight, but I'll talk about that later. The last Admiral is of course Akainu, the donut maker himself. He's widely regarded as the strongest between the 3 OG Admirals. He doesn't rely on speed or some fighting technique, but what he does rely on is raw strength and the pure destructive ability of his Devil Fruit, which is of course the Magma no Mi. His Devil Fruit allows him to turn into magma at will, and also create large magma projectiles that are super destructive. Now that we have the Admirals out of the way, let's talk about the Hokage's powers and abilities. I'll talk about all the characters' weaknesses later on. The first Hokage that I'm going to talk about is of course the big man himself, Hashirama. He was regarded as the shinobi god for good reason. While he was alive, there was only one person who could really compete with him, and that was of course Madara. He really has no major weaknesses. His offense and defense ability were second to none. Hashirama was able to use Sage Mode. Similar to Naruto and Jiraiya, he was able to use the natural energy around him to create attacks. He was also known for having a super fast regeneration ability. Attacks that would be fatal to most, he could fully heal in only a couple of minutes. His chakra pool was basically limitless, allowing him to be on both offense and defense at all times. What I'm trying to get through to you is that he's extremely strong, and in terms of Naruto Shippuden characters, there are only 2 or 3 that I can confidently say are stronger than him. Continuing to the next Hokage, I'm going to be talking about Tobirama, also known as the second Hokage. During his prime, he was known to be as strong as Hashirama or slightly weaker. He was known for his extremely high combat IQ and also his hatred for a certain clan. He was also the one who originally created the reanimation jutsu. Last and definitely least between the 3 Hokage is Sarutobi. Not to be biased or anything, but I kind of hated him ever since I found out he knew about Naruto's father and his whole situation, but still allowed him to be in the position that he was in. Even though we don't know how strong the 3rd Hokage was in his prime, we can hypothesize that he was probably super strong because he was still able to hold his own against the primal Orochimaru, even though he was older. Before continuing on to the hypothetical battle, I want to talk about the One Piece character's weaknesses. And that weakness is of course water. All 3 Admirals use a Devil Fruit, and the main weakness for Devil Fruit users is water. The Naruto characters have a huge advantage in that area, being able to use water style jutsus. They have a direct counter to the 3 Admirals, but will it be enough to win? But let's get on to the main subject, who I think would win in a fight. I'm going to break the fight into matchups who I think would initially be paired against each other. I think the initial matchups would be Akainu versus Hashirama, Aokiji versus Tobirama, and Kizaru versus the 3rd Hokage. There's not a super detailed explanation for me pairing them up like this. I'm just doing who's strongest to weakest in my opinion. Remember how I said Aokiji has a super important role in this fight? Well, I'm going to talk about that now. I mentioned earlier that the Hokages have a direct counter to the Admirals, but I kind of lied. Aokiji would be able to turn any water style jutsu or attack into ice, basically making water useless and a non-factor in the fight. Anyways, let's continue. I think the 3rd Hokage would be the first one to be defeated. He's going against someone the speed of light. He wouldn't be able to keep up with his attacks. But let's say he could defend against light speed attacks. How would you expect him to attack somebody who's light speed? He is by far the weakest, and honestly he just gets speed blitzed. So continuing in the fight, it's a 3v2. The Hokages are down. Do they have a chance at winning? I honestly think that Tobirama and Hashirama would both get overwhelmed because Akainu's destructive ability an Aokiji being able to play defense. The X factor in the fight though is really Kizaru. Him being able to move at light speed is such an advantage for the Admirals. He would really be able to make so many offensive opportunities just because of his speed. So in conclusion, the third Hokage sucks and he sells the fight for the other two as soon as it begins. If you like this type of content, please consider subbing. Walked in like Travis, where's the loot? Got a shorty on my side, she gon' shoot.